Welcome to the Armored Soil Podcast, brought to you by the Renville SWCD, where we look to bring real-life information on all things sustainable resources and agriculture. We believe that soil is invaluable and that protecting our soil is the key to sustainability of all aspects of life. Please like and subscribe to our page wherever you get your podcasts. The information you will hear about is personal experiences and in no way is agronomic advice. If you are interested in implementing the practices or techniques you hear about, we recommend you reach out to your agronomist, NRCS office, or local conservation district for ways to work them into your farming operation. For more information about our liability in our podcast, please visit renvilleswcd.com. With that, this week we have local farmer Erik Dean, who will be joining us to talk about armoring the soil and what he does to keep his soil covered and what he believes armoring the soil and how armoring the soil benefits his operation. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to the Armored Soil Podcast. This morning we have some in-studio guests that we'd like to introduce. Maybe if we want to start on my far left.
Hi, I'm Heidi Brownhorst. I'm the coordinator for the Hawk Creek Watershed Project. So my office works a lot with Holly's office on a lot of projects and a lot of soil health. So she asked me to help co-host this podcast with her today.
And I'm Erik Dean. I'm a farmer in eastern Renville County and a little bit in southern county. Raise corn, soybeans, and some sweet corn and peas for canning crops.
Well, welcome. Thank you both for joining us today. So Erik, tell us, how long have you been farming?
I started in 2006, so I guess I'm going on 18 years now.
18 years. That's awesome. And so that time, have you been farming the same way, or when did you start implementing more armor on your soil?
Yeah, it started out, my dad and he slowly kind of transitioned out and I transitioned in, and we were pretty much, I guess, your typical conventional till farm in the area, ripping corn stalks in the fall, field cultivating in the spring, and then usually having the co-op run the chisel plow and then field cultivating after in the spring, soybean ground to corn to corn. Basically in the fall of 2011 it was a bad tillage year.
Tell us what you mean a bad tillage year.
It was a wet spring that year in 2011, so we all mudded every farmer. We were late, and we all mudded our crop in. We tilled when we should have, and then it got kind of hot and dry over the summer, kind of baked our heavy clay soils, and then the guys that were doing deeper tillage were bringing up these big basketball-sized clumps of soil, and it was getting, parts were getting in short supply at the dealerships to repair tillage implements, and so I thought, well, why don't I rent a vertical till? That was kind of the big thing at the time, and I did that on some corn stalks, and I think I even left some passes where I didn't do anything, and then the next spring I kind of did a combination of either just leaving it, for true no-till, and then some spring vertical tillage, and that worked out really good. In 2012, I thought I didn't see any change in the soybean yields. In fact, but better versus the what we had been conventionally doing. So that kind of gave me the confidence to keep trying, and I guess then we kind of transitioned more to kind of vertical tilling our corn stalks, and then continuing to kind of eliminate passes, and then eventually we became all no-till on our soybeans and corn stalks, and then did a little bit of strip till for a while in our soybean ground going to corn, and then the last, I would say 6-7 years, been pretty much 100% no-till on everything. And then the last 4 or 5 years, pretty much 100% cover crops. Then,
So really keeping that soil armored, keeping it protected, keeping it covered.
yeah, I mean, I would call it residue or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely. Well, you've gone out to the fields. I mean, we've done the cylinder, the
Infiltration
infiltration
ring.
test. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and yeah, you can definitely see that the armor has protected the soil and allowed that structure to get.
And we'll get into it, but you're doing lots of other armor with things in your cropping system as well, with cover crops and things too. So we don't want to just think it's residue, but there's lots of other things in play with armoring.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting though, how it's been kind of a transition in this system, right? Where it's been Mother Nature maybe forced your hand to try something a little
Right.
bit different.
Yep.
And then you kind of saw some pretty significant results pretty quickly, and then just kind of kept stepping into it. Does that kind of feel or sound right?
Yeah. I guess I do have the advantage of having some vegetables in my rotation. So because peas and sweet corn typically get off the field earlier in the fall, I had the ability then to experiment with different cover crops. Like sometime, I think one of my first no-tilling experiences with corn was actually after sweet corn, just doing a simple oats cover crop in the fall, letting it winter kill,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's less residue with sweet corn typically
Oh, sure.
compared to field corn. And then just before we making any modifications or anything like that to the planter, just going in and planting, having a good experience with that. Typically the soil is more mellow after sweet corn, so you do have some I guess more leeway to experiment
Sure.
there.
So you kind of talked a little bit about harvest, and then, back in the fall of 11 when you had chose the vertical till to try that technique on your corn stalks. Maybe we could step through on your crop rotation how you're managing that residue, maybe crop by crop,
Sure.
and how that looks like when it equals armor on the soil.
The first thing we noticed when I experimented with just no-tilling into corn stalks without doing any vertical tillage is there was a lot of fluffy, kind of residue from our chopping corn head.
Sure. Really small sized residue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, small size residue, and it's not anchored, to the corn stalk anymore. So it's just kind of loose and fluffy. And then the next spring, sometimes it's stayed fluffy or whatever, dry on the drier side. Sometimes that would just kind of, if the planter would catch somehow, you just kind of push and you'd have these big piles. And so one of the first things we did is we just switched to a non-chopping corn head.
Sure.
And when you leave that residue kind of attached to that corn stalk, it does help in the spring then for the planter to just kind of pull through.
Sure.
It's attached to the ground.
Yeah.
You get less of those piles. You still every now and then different things happen with the planter or whatever. You can still get piles, but
Yeah.
you avoid those as much as possible. And then in soybeans, as the heads have gotten bigger and bigger, it gets harder to throw that residue back out to fill the space that the head had taken. And one trick we did was we don't chop our bean residue really fine particle sizes
Sure.
or piece sizes. A little bit bigger piece of stem can roll a little bit further.
Is that 4 to 6 inches, or what kind of is that range on the stem size?
Well, I guess we found about on our combine, our chopping knives, the knife bank just set it about halfway
Okay.
or whatever. And I don't know. I mean, you can get some longer pieces.
Yeah.
It's not all uniform size. So you get some longer ones, you get some shorter ones. And these different style combines have different residue management systems. I like the ones now, they're becoming more common with the beater style or whatever. Ours doesn't have that. But you make the best adjustments that you can. It is key to get that soybean residue back out over the whole length of where your combine went.
Have it evenly spread behind the combine.
Yeah. Yep. You don't want those windrows.
Sure.
Either planting too shallow or just, that soil's going to be colder and the corn is going to be further behind in those windrow areas.
Sure. You had talked before about the corn stalks when you were using the chopping head, how it really shredded them into a small size. I would assume that the soybeans did the same thing when they were really small sized, and what we've seen on other fields, I think would be maybe similar, where it does really just kind of interlock and create that mat, almost even like if you mow your grass too tall.
Right.
And now you've created this windrow, and it's not just a pile, it's really interlocked and
Yep.
creates that mat where, like you're saying, then it's kind of staying flat to the soil, cool, moist, which isn't what you're looking for, right? You're wanting to armor, but yet you're wanting air movement and nothing that's locked and compacted.
Right. Yeah, and if you do chisel plow in the fall, well, you don't want those longer pieces because eventually those will catch on the shank, and then you will have muskrat piles out in your field.
Right.
But as long as you're just gonna no-till with them, those bigger pieces are actually a little bit easier for your residue managers on your planter to kind of move out of the way.
Sure.
If it doesn't catch it, maybe the first time the second time it'll catch it on the way around and get it out of the way.
Sure. So on your peas and sweet corn, because that's the other piece of your rotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's harvested by the cannery, or what does that look like for harvest?
Yep.
And then residue
Yep. They
or
handle
armor after that.
Yeah. They handle all of that. One of the things I was a little bit concerned about was, when it's time to harvest. There's it's not like a farmer where we can kind of wait a day maybe for the rain to drain out a little bit and the ground to firm up. When it's time to go, they go.
Mhm.
And so I was worried about ruts. But one of the good things is when you are armoring your soil and you are building up that soil structure, the soil will carry the equipment better after a rain. And so then you're not leaving the ruts. I have had to go out after peas, more so than sweet corn, and do some light tillage passes to level things out.
Sure.
But I would say, typically very light, only going maybe 2 inches deep just to level things out, not a big river pass.
Sure.
You're going 6 to 8 inches deep or anything like that. Yeah, you do want to get it leveled back out to make sure that you're not ponding water and stuff like that.
Well, and to make sure that you've got even seed depth next crop.
Right.
All of that as well plays into that.
Right.
But when, for example, peas, and not to pick on the canning crops, because it's a great opportunity in your rotation to get cover crops in early and armor in a different way. But they tend to, as I see them, leave kind of a windrow behind them of residue that could be armor. And we were talking about your combine spreading it out. What does that look like a little bit for you? How do you manage that in a way that doesn't really increase labor, but minimize it?
I guess we've, a lot of times what I've done, like after peas, is I usually will do a burn down because
Chemical burn down.
a chemical burn down.
Okay.
Yep. It is crucial to try to, I guess, control the weeds when you can, because I won't be killing them with tillage like you normally would after a pea crop. And so then you got to wait, depending on what you use, you have to wait maybe a week to 2 weeks to then replant a cover crop. And then it does kind of allow that residue then to dry up and get a little bit crispy or whatever.
Sure.
And then I'll have the co-op maybe put some P&K down and then a good cover crop mix. I usually do more of my mixes after vegetables.
Sure.
And then a lot of times I will do like an angled pass one way with the vertical tillage machine, trying to spread out that windrow.
Sure.
And then I'll come back another way, spread out that windrow. And you still sometimes do have little piles, but it is, it's pretty green. So by spring, there really isn't
Sure.
issues there.
It just kind of breaks down with the rest of your cover crop that's out
Right.
there.
Yep.
Okay.
I have you can coordinate. I haven't had this for a while, but sometimes guys have you can find livestock guys that will actually they have to turn it a bunch of times, those windrows,
Oh,
to
sure.
get them to dry out, and then
And then they'll bail 'em.
they'll bail them up.
Sure.
So you can manage it that way.
Sure. Yep. You could take the armor off, but in that instance, you're putting armor back on with your cover crop. So it's kind of that balance.
Yeah, and a lot of times in that case, I will do like a manure swap.
Oh, sure.
whatever.
Nice.
They take off
It's more organic nutrients out there
Mhm.
now. Good strategy. So on the sweet corn then, let's just touch on that briefly again now. Are they evenly spreading it out? I know we talked it's not as much residue, but what does that look like when you're managing that armor?
Yeah, really, for the most part, it's similar to their corn heads are very similar to a non-chopping corn head. They have stock rolls or
Oh, sure.
whatever that just kind of crunch it down, but it doesn't actually separate it
Okay.
from the
From the soil.
soil in most cases. Yeah, so it's really not a lot different than field corn, but yeah, it's greener. It has more moisture in it when it's harvested, so it will typically break down a little bit more by spring. And then usually you will have a longer chance then to get a overwintering cover crop established, and in sweet corn versus field corn. And then you can that overwintering cover crop like a rye does help to like pin down that residue the
Sure.
next spring when I'm going to plant.
Mhm.
And it seems to help the residue managers work better. So yeah, I think you've ridden with me in late harvested sweet corn the year before, where it still seems like there's a lot of residue, but it's just not the same as field corn. Even if you're planting it breaks down quickly after planting, and it didn't seem to be much of an issue for getting field corn established the next spring.
I would agree. It's really interesting having ridden with you out there, and then also a couple years ago where you had some sweet corn that was passed by for the cannery because of, I don't know, too mature or whatever that reasoning is.
Mhm.
And then you ended up rolling that, if I recall,
I did. Mhm.
and then seeding a multi-species cover crop.
Yep.
That field, if you're not opposed to it, we might link a little bit of that video that we have on our YouTube to this recording
Sure.
because it was really interesting to see, like, when you rolled it from the drone, holy cow, did that look like a lot of armor out there.
That's true.
And then when you seeded the cover crop, it just melted away and the cover crop took off and all those
Mhm.
nutrients from the sweet corn became available for the cover crop to grow. And it really was a good system. It worked out, it seemed.
Yep. Yeah, no, that field worked out really well. I think that was actually my best yielding field last year. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, a past sweet corn field is really a lot like having a cover crop for a whole year
Right.
the year before. So for the most part, you're recapturing all the nutrients. It looks a little bit odd, yeah, with, like you say, right after all the residue that's just laying out there, but it
Mhm.
does break down quickly. But even the next spring, it was odd because there was all these dried up sweet corn ears out
Yeah.
there. I didn't have as much of an issue with volunteer sweet corn as I thought I would. I think maybe it was just a drier summer,
Sure.
so it just didn't keep re-germinating.
And that was an interesting variety you had out there, though, too. That was that
It
kind
was
of
a white, yeah, it's a specialty kind of sweet corn. So yeah, I don't know, maybe different sweet corns. I have had volunteer sweet corn at times, but yeah, maybe it depends on.
Yeah, I don't know. I just found that corn really interesting too, because in the spring when we were out there, you could pick up the whole ear, and it was
Mhm.
still very irregular as far as the kernels. And I was surprised too. Very few was germinating because we see that all the time when sweet corn field germinates right from the cob, and then away you go with volunteer corn. But I didn't notice that out there.
I do see that in general with no-till. I if you have a wet year, you're going to get some volunteer sweet corn, but or volunteer corn, even no-tilling soybeans into field corn. But typically, when you leave the ears on the top of the ground, if you're not mixing soil in, you will get less volunteer corn. So then I have saved some money in the past on my herbicides, not having to deal with the volunteer field corn in the soybeans the next year.
Sure. Yeah. So, what have you noticed as far as other unexpected issues or challenges with having this additional armor? I know you talked a little bit about the additional passes, um, but has there been anything that you tell the audience that this is the thing that, as far as armoring that transition, there was an unexpected implication that I didn't think about until I was out in the planter? Or is there something like that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely are. That residue will leave your soil typically cooler and better in
Sure.
the spring, and so I guess as long as you're aware of that, and try to manage that, in a couple ways. Uh, we added a system on our planner to be able to adjust the row cleaners, how aggressive they are from the cab, because every field is a little bit different, and it just saved us time rather than when you pull into a new field having to adjust those all the time, or maybe even conditions change throughout the field.
Sure.
And since that step is a very important step in the process, we wanted to make sure that we had focused on that. I mentioned cover crops. That's a big thing too. Rye really takes off early in the spring, and oftentimes it's kind of getting really going by the time you're starting to plant. It's taking up a lot of that excess moisture.
Cereal rye
The cereal rye.
or winter
Yep,
rye.
winter
whatever,
rye or cereal
something
rye.
like that.
Yeah. So it doesn't really. It'll help with the the wet conditions, and then the residue managers, I guess, is kind of helping with the cooler conditions. You do. The guys have always talked about being a little bit more patient. I do tend to plant my vegetable, either after peas or sweet corn or before my soybean
Oh, sure.
fields, just because there is usually a little less residue. In the sweet corn, it's depending on whether that's kind of a later harvested field the year before, or
So you mentioned planting your soybeans, though. Are you planting your soybeans before your corn?
I haven't yet. Talking with some other guys this last winter, though, it does seem like we might be trending that way. I do share machinery with my cousin, and he's more on the conventional till side. So I do have the option of letting him kind of have the planter before me on his more conventional till fields. And then this last winter, I actually bought a drill for seeding cover crops, but I might experiment with a field or two of doing some soybeans before I plant some of my corn, just to see if that works, because it does seem like the more patient I am, the better.
And on your soybeans, you're green seeding some of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, I try to do green seeding on everything. That's part of the reason why I bought the drill. In the past, I had been kind of having the co-op spread after the field corn was off. I have experimented with aerial seeding and had mixed results.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, after corn harvest, it's getting colder and stuff like that. So the rye is there. It's a little slower in the spring.
Sure.
It typically plants better if you get a good catch, and so that's part of the thinking behind this drill is maybe in these drier falls, maybe I can get that seed down into some moisture and hopefully get my cover crop established a little bit better.
That seed to soil contact, right? It's huge when you're talking about your cash crop.
Right.
When we're talking about establishing wildlife habitat, anything, planting in your garden, it's all relevant, that seed to soil. So I think you're right. If you can be strategic with that, germination might change. But we kind of skimmed over green seeding as part of your armor system. Green seeding is really where you've got a crop out there that's green and living.
Yep.
taking up moisture, like you said, and then you're planting your cash crop directly into that corn, soybeans specifically. Have you done any green seeding with your canning crops, with the peas or the sweet corn?
Yeah, I've done it with both of them. In the last few years, I haven't green seeded sweet corn for a while because just luck of the draw or whatever. The way it's been working the last few years, I've had later planted sweet corn,
Sure.
and with it being so dry, I've been worried about the moisture uptake. So I have been terminating my cereal rye at least 2 or 3 weeks before I end up planting. And I've been planting towards the end of June, so I'm probably terminating, at the beginning of June.
Sure. But then whatever you terminated becomes armor.
Right.
So you're still preventing wind erosion. You're still keeping that soil protected from that raindrop impact. So then hopefully the raindrop stays where it lands.
Yep.
Because you're right, the last 2 growing seasons, rain has been at a premium.
Yep. Yep. And you have that option if you do get an earlier planting window. It is on the wetter side. Well, then I will just green seed, and then you just got to be careful because they're not Roundup resistant.
Sure.
So you have to be right on top of it with the Roundup
Sure.
afterwards.
That's maybe
terminate.
adjusting your thinking and your planning, right? Where you maybe have to be pivoting a little more.
Right. And then with peas, I don't see those myself. I hire a custom guy who's got a no-till air seeder, and he's had no issues getting it into the ground, even with a green seeding. And then there too, just make sure I get it back quickly after planting and terminate the cover crop.
Heidi, you've been pretty quiet. Eric and I have been kind of dominating the floor. Do you have anything?
Yeah, you touched on when they harvest your peas and just how they're able to kind of, the equipment floats pretty easily over the soil, and you haven't, there's ruts, but maybe not as severe as maybe in some other fields. Can you talk a little bit more about like compaction? Have you noticed any changes in compaction in your soils with changing your tillage and doing cover crops?
Yeah, I mean that is the biggest. That is one of the bigger concerns I would say from a lot of farmers about how do I deal with compaction or whatever. I mean we still, even in field corn, I mean we still drive our semis on the end lands and stuff like that. We have pretty resilient soils. I guess I can't speak for a different type of soil, but really once you build up that structure, that soil, it has a good ability to just heal itself or whatever. By the next spring, it kind of seems to pop back up. Even if you do have a few, you can tell kind of maybe where the trucks went the fall before, as long as it's not holding water, I always plant into it, and by the next fall, you can't even tell. It just kind of bounces back. I think the way you see it the most, I mentioned peas. You definitely see it in peas, but where you see it the most is probably sweet corn, because there's just so much more tonnage out there compared to peas, and so the sweet corn pickers get weighed down
The weight, yeah.
quicker. Yeah, and you can really tell, and oftentimes there's a lot more crews around, so you can, if you can find another crew close by, within 5 to 10 miles or something like that, and they've had a similar amount of rain on that field, you can definitely tell that the conventional till fields are leaving big ruts, and your no-till field. I've had actually trucks driving in my field, not necessarily sidewinding, but loading in the field where that wouldn't even be possible, conventionally tilled field. Yeah. So, I mean, that really speaks to, I guess, I call it trafficability or whatever in the field.
And I think that's exactly what you're describing as far as the soil aggregate changing. You're creating that. We'll put a image in this video, but it really talks about that pore space that you're creating by not running iron through that soil profile and breaking up that soil structure. Soil's a sponge and it wants to function that way. So it's exactly what you're describing. In the fall, maybe it kind of got drove down a little bit, but over winter we kind of had that freeze thaw. you provided some roots, so it had open pore space for water and air to come in, and then it can just naturally bounce back and maintain that structure like you're describing. The other piece as a resident that people observe and comment to us about, and I personally experience, is driving by those fields at harvest time, especially summer harvest. You're not bringing soil onto the road. And so that's the piece of it. You're keeping your soil in your field,
Mhm.
and you're not dragging it out onto the road. Also, you're keeping it on your field this spring when the wind is blowing. Like today, we chose to record because it's windy as heck. And so your soil is staying on the field. It's not leaving from wind erosion as well. So there's just that armoring and that structure, that trafficability. It's all intertwined with
Mhm.
just sustainability for your operation, right?
Right. And there is a safety factor. I mean, when it gets too wet this week, where they will load the trucks on our township roads, our
Sure.
gravel roads, and but yet, you know, if you can be able to drive the semis out in the field and load them in the field, then you're not stopping traffic, or you know, especially at night because they run 24/7.
Yep.
You know, you've eliminated a chance for an accident.
Well, it sounds like it's a pretty good system.
There's a lot of learning to it, but yeah, if you can kind of work out the kinks, I guess there's some advantage. I've told this to other guys. I mean, I do have to deal with the cold and wet. There's no getting around that in the spring, and that does scare a lot of farmers. But I don't struggle as much with soil crusting. You know, after you plant, and you get a heavy rain, and the soil just turns like we talked about in 2011 with the brick. You know, we have these heavy clay soils. That pore space collapses, and then it gets hard, and it gets hard for that little seed to find its way to the surface.
Yeah.
So I'm gaining potentially some issues that I have to deal with, but I'm eliminating some.
So is there other maybe pivots or adjustments you've made along that, maybe with shorter day crop to try and combat, if you feel like maybe you're able to plant day one, you're not the first neighbor out in the neighborhood, right? Planting.
Right.
If if you're delaying that, have you found some adjustment there that has maybe given you a little bit of ease, or just not quite yet? Changing varieties and
I do.
maturity.
I would say I am trending a little bit more on the earlier side of varieties. It's not all driven because of the residue. There's a few other factors. I mean, some of it is establishing cover crops because they are so important. And then, other factors have to do with sharing equipment. So I have to be a little bit more flexible. We don't know exactly. We try to be as equitable as we can. And so I try to keep fields as open as I can to being a good partner. And then we rent fall storage.
Mm.
And so we have to be a little more flexible with that as well too when that opens up. But it's he's a farmer, so he does his corn first. So there's a few factors involved with that besides just the residue.
Yeah. Sounds like you're a master juggler.
Well,
You've got a lot of balls in the air of just all of these pieces, right? And just the timing of everything, and just that communication side of it too. Maybe just thinking a little bit differently about that.
Yeah, we try to stay as flexible as we can. And, one of the things that I know in this area, it's very, people in the spring get very nervous about later planting. You can kind of mess up early, and our soils are a little bit more forgiving. It will allow you to kind of mess up early. But the one thing is, again, I kind of keep going back to the structure and the trafficability issue is, it does seem like my soils can handle things a little bit on the wetter side.
Mm-hmm.
So I might have the ability to be a little bit more patient, because as I'm waiting, my cover crop is growing.
Right.
And so, that's another factor too. A conventional till guy, the clock is ticking for him, maybe not quite as, and for me, it might not be quite as fast, I guess.
Sure. Well, it's a good scenario because you're right. While you're out there not planting, your cover crop is photosynthesizing, harvesting energy from the sun,
Mhm.
and putting nitrogen into your soil. And you're putting carbon from the atmosphere through the plant coming out into your soil, which is now considered nitrogen in your system too. So
Yeah.
So can we talk about that? Have you adjusted your fertilizer rates because of the cover crop species or the mixes that you put out there?
Not really the rates, probably more of the timing. Because you will. The root is getting bigger, as you wait, and so it is taking up more nutrients. So I do. I put nitrogen on with the planter. We didn't used to do that before I no-tilled, and I have seen a benefit to that. So I'm trying to overcome, I guess, that carbon penalty by adding the nitrogen right in the row with the planter, and then with my burn down that I have to come back and kill off my cover crop. I'm also putting on some nitrogen with that process, the weed and feed, I guess you'd maybe call it. And then I have a spinner spreader that is mounted on a row crop tractor, and then I will come back and top dress the rest of my nitrogen in season. So I probably am spoon feeding, I guess, a little bit more to try to counteract the residue, tying up nitrogen and the cover crops. I do eventually get that nitrogen back kind of later in the season, I think, as the cover crops and the residue are breaking down. So I feel like I have good kind of late season nitrogen. But I'm trying to manage more for an early season push, I guess.
Sure. Well, and when you started down this journey after 2011 crop year, you're a bit of a unicorn in our area. And if you could go back, what would be a piece of advice that you wished you would have had when you started down this?
Yeah, there isn't just like one big thing. I mean, I think the major thing is, if you're interested in this process, it's not for everybody. You got to kind of take stock, I guess, of what your strengths and weaknesses are. But if you're interested in it, I think you just have to go out and just try it. You can only plan and whatever for so long, and then eventually you just have to go and because without actually seeing it for yourself, you're not going to probably understand even what we're talking about right now. In terms of like structure or when I dig for seed now, it's rare if I don't see a worm when I'm digging for seed. Well, that never used to happen. So you just notice like small changes like that. Yeah, I don't know. Without, in the spring, we're always so busy. So it's not like you can hop off the tractor and go out into a no-tiller's field really to look. So I would recommend just trying it on one of your fields and noticing the changes for yourself, I guess.
I would 100% agree with that. I mean, Heidi and I work with farmers throughout the county in the watershed, and across the road is different. Across the fence line is different because, like Erik's point, there's just been so many compounding factors over history, some that maybe even the current operator didn't have input into as far as the weight of the equipment, the tire width, the track, or not. All of that has compounded into this. In addition, the herbicide, pesticide, the crop rotation, all of those things have been part of the factors in changing that structure and reducing that armor in the system. And so the recovery is different. The piece I would like to echo on that recovery is if we're intentional, we can see change rapidly within a growing season. I'm not saying yield change, but I'm saying change to the soil structure.
Yeah, I mean, you've come out and done, what is the other one, the aggregate or the slake test?
Yeah,
or
yep,
whatever.
we've done slake out there, yep.
And I was worried. I thought, well, maybe I'll be the one person that I do all this stuff and it doesn't work. But it does. That made the proof is in the pudding, as they say. If you build it, it will come. I didn't do anything special. I just followed the recommendations and did less tillage and put out the soil armor or had residue out there, and the soil will recover.
Yeah. What do you think has been the most rewarding piece of this switch or transition?
Well, I mean, it's kind of fun to learn new stuff and see the changes I just talked about, where you're actually going out and running these tests. And then there's a few kind of, I guess, maybe ancillary benefits as well. When you leave your fields level in the fall and you leave residue, they will hide all sorts of wildlife out there. I think you've been riding out in the tractor and seen jackrabbits, and there aren't many jackrabbits in eastern Redwood County, but there are a few around in my fields.
Yep.
They like cornstalk residue for whatever reason. A few more partridge are, kind of showing up, and pheasants and deer. I've actually almost kind of ran over a fawn one year. Luckily, I stopped in time. So, yeah, you get some of those benefits. And then, I've taken up cross country skiing, and it's a lot easier to go out and ski in a flat field. So there's, or if you're four wheeling or snowmobiling in the winter or whatever, there are some recreational benefits there too.
Oh, as a kid, we always snowmobiled across the alfalfa
Sure.
because it was way easier than the worked corn ground.
That makes
Totally,
sense.
I get it.
Yeah.
Until we got caught.
Right.
So, it just seems like in, conversation you and I had, probably one of the first ones is part of going down this journey of reduced tillage and keeping that soil armored is that you enjoy recreating in Renville County and on your farm.
Right.
And so just being able to harvest, maybe plant a few more cover crops, and then just be done, right? Is that, not to get too philosophical on you, but do you feel like that has improved just kind of that work-life balance a little bit for you? It's an unfair question. I didn't tell you I was going to ask that. So,
Well, kind of baked into all of this. 09 was a really tough year. That was a wet fall, and I don't think we finished up tillage till first, second week of December.
yeah.
Very stressful. It is a lot less stressful when you don't have to worry about your tillage. And when you're done harvesting corn, try to get some cover crops planted, and there's multiple ways to do that. And I guess if you don't, you can always try again in the spring or whatever too. But it is nice to not have to have a whole nother job after you finish harvesting,
Right.
or worry about, I guess, hiring a guy. And there's still breakdowns, so you still stop the combine and go fix things or whatever. Where now we don't have to worry about that as much. That has helped. We've had a lot of wet years since then. The 2010s was the wettest decade on record. So there were, even not that far away, 2019 was a wet fall. And it's kind of nice because it is less stress for the whole crew when, for the most part, the grain cart operator doesn't have to worry about getting stuck. We got stuck in 2009 a lot. So,
Eric, is there anything else that you're really hoping to cover and we didn't touch on that came to Armory?
I think we covered pretty much all the issues.
If I had my say, we'd keep you hostage here all day and just keep asking you questions. Because what you're doing is very innovative. It's really awesome to see when we drive by your fields in the winter, the soil is and the snow in the road ditch. When we drive by your fields in the winter, the snow is white.
Oh.
And the neighbors, the snow tends to be black or brown with soil.
Yep.
And so it's really, just big picture, great that we can see that. And that's a really visual impact that you're having. Public safety, keeping your nutrients in place, keeping your soil in place. There's just all of these compounding benefits of keeping that soil armored like you do.
Yeah, and I guess one thought, I did make that transition. We did a little strip tilling and then went to no-till. And, when I would leave a berm in the fall and then it would kind of collapse and then I had a valley and I didn't like that. That was kind of something that spoke to me like, well, maybe I can just no-till. To me, I was seeing it as like I must be having more air and pore space in between. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe there are some strip tillers that are wondering, well, should I maybe transition over to no-till? I would say maybe use that structure as a sign. Yeah, if you feel like you've built up that structure in between the row good enough, your field might be telling you that, maybe I don't need to use this tillage.
Yeah. think there's lots of little signs
Right.
that are very visual, and that we can see. And it's just really, like you said, just now kind of reading those signs and interpreting them. And maybe it's on this 40 or this 20.
Right.
And maybe you're more comfortable doing it well behind the building site where nobody can see it.
Right.
Eric's doing a lot of stuff out on county blacktop, so everybody can see, and it's fantastic. Just put it out there. You've really been a motivator, I believe, for farmers in the county as well, because they've been seeing your success. So thank you for your leadership in that. Well, this concludes our soil armor for the Armored Soil podcast today. Again, I'd like to thank my guests, Erik Dean and Heidi Roundhorse today, and hope you join us next time. Thanks.